how can something that's, often seen as taboo, maybe even sinful, how can that possibly be a direct path to enlightenment?
It sounds pretty wild, doesn't it?
It really does. Well, welcome everyone to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into a really unconventional and honestly pretty influential work, Osho's From Sex to Superconsciousness.
Yeah, our goal today, our deep dive, it's all about unpacking Osho's, let's say, radical idea.
Which is?
That you can transform what most people just see as sexual energy into, well, a profound spiritual awakening. We're going to pull out the key insights from the sources we've got.
Kind of a shortcut to understanding this complex and definitely debated philosophy.
Exactly.
And we've got quite a mix of sources today. We have actual excerpts from the book, which is great. We've got summaries from places like Bookey and OshoFragrance.org, and then also reviews from Goodreads and Amazon India, just to see what people are saying.
Sounds like a good plan. So maybe we should start with Osho himself.
Good idea. The man behind the message.
Right. So Osho, born Chandra Mohan Jain back in 1931, passed away in 1990. He was an Indian spiritual teacher known for being, well, provocative.
That seems like an understatement sometimes.
Maybe. He really tackled big topics: meditation, consciousness, and obviously sexuality, which is our focus.
And it's important to remember, right, that his books often aren't written in the traditional sense.
That's a key point. Many of his works, including From Sex to Superconsciousness, are actually transcriptions of his spontaneous talks.
So we're kind of listening in on his thoughts as they happen.
Pretty much. And this specific book, From Sex to Superconsciousness, was first published in 1979.
But based on talks from way earlier, right? Like the late 60s?
Exactly. Talks from August to October 1968. The original Hindi title was Sambhog Ke Samadhi Se.
Which hints at the core idea.
It does. And the book's divided into 5 chapters. You have to think about the timing in late 60s, early 70s publishing.
Right, a period of huge social and spiritual change.
Which explains why it was both so influential and so controversial and really hit a nerve.
Okay, so let's get right into that core idea, the one that's maybe the most powerful.
Let's do it.
He basically says sexual energy isn't just physical. He calls it a divine creative force.
It's a huge reframing. His central point is that this energy, this fundamental force, can be actively transformed.
Transformed how? Like sublimated?
Exactly. Sublimated into spiritual love and what he called superconsciousness, or samadhi.
Okay. Does he explain that transformation?
He uses a really vivid analogy from the source material. He compares sex to coal.
Okay, coal, basic fuel.
Right. But he says through understanding and specific meditation techniques that coal can be transformed into the diamond of celibacy.
Wow, coal to diamond, that's quite a leap. So celibacy here isn't just about not having sex.
No, not in the repressive sense. It's more about reaching a state where that energy is refined. It's moving, as he put it, from lust to light. It's about understanding the energy, not just denying it.
Okay, from lust to light. But how, practically? Does he get into the nitty-gritty? Because that analogy is powerful, but,
Oh, he absolutely gets practical. And yes, some of it is pretty radical.
Like what?
Well, the sources talk about practices like really prolonged coitus.
Prolonged?
Yeah, sometimes up to 3 hours apparently. But combined with very slow, very conscious breathing, focusing on an energy center called the Agni Chakra.
3 hours? Wow, so it's not just the act itself.
Not at all. For Osho, when approached with this deep awareness, this meditative quality, sex becomes a sacred doorway to personal growth.
That is completely different from how society.
Absolutely. Often it's labeled sinful, something to be ashamed of.
Yeah, definitely suppress. And Osho had strong feelings about that suppression, didn't he?
He certainly did. He
Yeah.
was incredibly critical of it. And he didn't just criticize, he pointed to what he saw as severe consequences.
Consequences like what?
Well, he cites some pretty staggering statistics in the sources. He claims, for instance, that 98% of mental illness,
98%.
yes, and 99% of what was then termed female hysteria, he linked directly to sexual suppression.
Those numbers are huge. Did he back those up somehow, or was it more his assertion?
It's presented more as his observation, his interpretation of the psychological landscape he saw. He even mentioned that 82% of New York City's population was supposedly mentally abnormal because of these issues.
Wow, so he saw a direct line between suppressing sex and things like neuroses, perversions.
Yes, and even bigger societal problems like wars and widespread mental health crises. His argument was that we desperately lack a scientific understanding of sex, replacing it with morality and fear.
A scientific understanding, That implies needing education, open discussion. Did he suggest ways to do that, especially with kids?
He did, and again, his suggestions were pretty unconventional for the time and probably still are for many.
I'm sensing a theme here. What did he suggest?
Well, for instance, he recommended allowing children to be nude at home sometime.
Nude, why?
To normalize the human body, let them become familiar with each other's bodies naturally. He thought this would reduce perverted attractions later on, or removing the mystery and taboo early.
Interesting. Anything else?
A big one was meditation. He stressed teaching meditation before age 14.
Before puberty really kicks in.
Exactly. The idea was to provide a channel for that emerging energy, to divert some of it towards spiritual growth before it became predominantly sexual.
So teaching sex ed and meditation almost side by side.
Yes, simultaneously. His vision was that this could help foster a new race. His words of healthier, more psychologically integrated, more evolved humans.
So meditation is preventative in a way, but also presented as a path in itself, right? Like maybe even a superior path to ecstasy itself.
That's definitely part of it. He suggested meditation could open a new door for children before that sexual energy fully awakens.
So the energy naturally flows towards meditation.
That was the hope. But it wasn't necessarily about choosing one over the other, especially for adults. He also talked about how practices during sex, like controlled breathing and awareness.
The things you mentioned earlier.
Right, those are meditative practices in themselves. They could lead to spiritual liberation. It's about integration, using that awareness.
Okay, so it's not just about the physical act or even just meditation alone. What about love? That often comes up in spiritual discussions.
Absolutely central for Osho. But not just romantic love as we usually think of it.
How did he define it then?
As a state of mind, really.
Yeah.
True love, in his view, goes beyond conditional relationships, beyond the ego.
How do you get there?
He said it requires stripping away societal conditioning, getting rid of too much intellectualizing about it. He contrasted unconditional love, which brings contentment, with conditional love, which he felt always leads to dissatisfaction.
And this connects back to sexual energy.
Critically, he saw love as essential for that transformation process, turning sexual energy into spiritual energy. He even uses the mother-child bond as an example in Chapter 5.
The mother-child bond, how does that fit?
He calls it an example of spiritual sex, a deep, unconditional connection that's completely beyond the physical act, pure spiritual union.
That really reframes intimacy. Which brings us to how he categorized different sexual experiences. He had levels, right?
Yes, 3 distinct levels, according to the source.
Okay, what are they?
First, there's the purely physical level. He described this as gross, mechanical.
Examples.
Things like prostitution or rape experiences devoid of connection.
Right.
Then comes the psychological level. This is mind-based, often rooted in emotion, but he saw it as unstable.
Like relationships based on romantic love.
Exactly. He specifically mentioned love-based marriages, particularly in the West, as often falling into this category intense, but potentially volatile because it's tied to changing thoughts and emotions.
Okay, so physical, psychological.
Yeah.
What's the third?
The spiritual level. This is where the experience becomes divine, fostering a sense of profound unity, a connection that transcends the physical bodies involved.
And the mother-child bond fits here.
That's his prime example of that pure spiritual connection. It's about a different quality of energy altogether.
It's a fascinating framework. But he also had warnings, right? If society doesn't understand sex in a way.
Oh yes, pretty dire warnings.
Yeah.
He predicted the world could essentially become a huge asylum.
An asylum. Why?
Due to unchecked issues like population explosion driven by unconscious procreation and also rising mental illness stemming from that repression we talked about.
But he also had a positive vision, didn't he? For a different future.
He did. A vision of a new humanity.
How would that look like?
People born from a more conscious spiritual union. He envisioned them having greater longevity, better health, more kindness, an innate sense of religiosity.
And this connects to the idea of brahmacharya.
Yes, children born out of brahmacharya, which again for him meant transformed, conscious sexual energy, not just abstinence. He thought these children would be healthier, more spiritual.
Almost like a Superman figure.
He even references that idea, connecting it to thinkers like Aurobindo and Nietzsche. It's tied to his advocacy for Planned Parenthood from love, ensuring conception happens in the best possible state, spiritually and emotionally.
It feels like he challenged everything, even the idea of rejecting less to find God.
Absolutely. He didn't see them as opposites to be chosen between. He argued kama, lust, and rama, God, are interconnected. You have to go through kama, understand it, transform it to reach rama.
So trying to just jump over lust is a mistake in his view.
A fundamental mistake. And this fueled his criticism of traditional moral preachers and gurus.
What was his issue?
He felt they often avoided talking about sex directly. And he suggested their authority, their whole profession, kind of depends on what we think of being moral about these pure moral.
So he saw himself differently.
Definitely. He rejected titles like Mahatma or Guru. He preferred to be seen as an authentic man, just trying to guide people towards their own potential, their own greatness within humanity.
Okay, let's talk about another really unusual practical tip from the book. Meditating on sexual imagery.
Right. That one definitely raises eyebrows.
How did he explain that?
He used the Khajuraho temples in India as an example. They're covered in, well, very explicit erotic sculptures.
I've heard of them.
Osho suggested that meditating on these images, really contemplating them without judgment, could actually transform lust into peace and understanding.
The opposite of what most moralists would say.
Exactly. He pointed out that moralists feared these images, wanted to cover them up, believing they'd incite lust. Osho saw it differently. Facing it consciously could lead beyond it.
So the underlying idea is always awareness.
Awareness and a kind of reverence. He believed a joyful, aware approach to intercourse itself could ultimately lead to lifelong freedom from sex. Not through suppression, but through transcendence, understanding it so fully that it no longer controls you.
It's clear why this book was and is so impactful, but also so controversial. What was the general reception like?
Very mixed, as you'd expect. On places like Goodreads, you see hundreds of reviews. They really run the gamut.
What about Amazon India? Any insights there?
Similar picture. Some readers talk about profound, life-changing insights. They felt it shifted their whole perspective on themselves, on relationships.
But others?
Others were critical, sometimes dismissing him as a sex guru.
A label he pushed back against.
Strongly. But the book is undeniably polarizing because it just directly confronts so many deeply held beliefs and societal norms about sex, religion, and spirituality. It doesn't shy away.
Okay, so wrapping this up, Osho's From Sex to Superconsciousness basically throws down a gauntlet.
It really does.
He presents this radical idea that sexual energy isn't the enemy, isn't something just physical to be, managed or suppressed.
Right. He sees it as this powerful divine force that, if understood and approached consciously, could be transformed.
Moving beyond societal hang-ups, beyond repression, towards spiritual liberation. The core takeaway is that challenge. Don't fear sex, don't suppress it, understand it, integrate it, channel it consciously. It could be a path to higher states, a healthier life.
Which leaves us with a really provocative thought to ponder, doesn't it?
Go on.
Well, if embracing and truly understanding our fundamental energies, even the most primal ones, like sex, if that really is a path to higher consciousness and maybe even a healthier society,
then what?
Then what does that say about how we currently handle these topics? In our own lives, in our communities, what might we actually gain if we started asking why certain things stay taboo? What if liberation, as Osho suggests, involves understanding the very things we've been taught to hide?